The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. The undergrowth and soil crunched with each step as I took a deep breath and soaked in the natural beauty around me. It was a moderate 67 degrees Fahrenheit, birds were singing, and the sun was shining down as I walked along the Strawberry Creek Trail. In about a half mile, I'd go off the trail to the designated backwoods camping area. The bubbling of the stream and the whisper of wind in the branches all sounded like an old friend welcoming me home. I had always considered Great Basin to be a hidden gem. It's the least visited national park in the States. In a few hours of hiking, I had only encountered 2 other people and 1 dog. And when I started into the wilderness to camp, I knew for sure I would be alone for the whole week. Working as a high school teacher, I got my fill of people every damn week. Don't get me wrong, I love my kids, but sometimes between them, my co-workers, supervisors, and angry parents, I could just feel like receding into a shell of jaded mistrust. Coming out here and enjoying the silence and peace of nature always made me feel better. I saw the familiar bend in the trail and started my way off the side and towards Blue Ridge. It was always my favorite spot to set up camp. A beautiful, peaceful meadow right under the shadow of Wheeler Peak. It was a strenuous hike, taking at least 2 days of non-stop marching from the parking area at the trailhead. But it was perfect, and it was always there for me. No matter what had happened in the 358 days leading up to this, I knew this week would be perfect. As I crested the ridge, I looked down at the field of small, flowering bushes. It was exactly as I remembered, always even more beautiful as the setting sun painted it in beautiful red hues. That's when I saw a tent, parked exactly where I planned on setting up. It looked like a small one-person tent, green canvas, with a cold fire pit in front. I felt frustrated, then sad, then frustrated at myself for these immature feelings. It's not like you own the park. You can always find a different spot. I knew that rationally, I should not be upset by this. But emotionally, it felt like I'd been betrayed by a family member. I sighed and trudged my way down to the field, setting down my pack at a spot about 1,000 feet away. Who knows? Maybe this could be good for you. One person with a shared interest instead of the usual crowd at work. I started making camp, trying my best to stay optimistic as I set up my tent and began to arrange a campfire. The sun had set completely by the time the fire was merrily crackling away. I ate a quick meal, just some canned soup I had brought. I'd be going fishing in the morning, but I always packed enough food just in case. I glanced over at the other tent as I chewed slowly. It was almost invisible in the waning moonlight. I hadn't seen anyone enter or exit the tent for the whole 2 hours I'd been there. And the strangest part was, there was no fire or even the glow of a lantern. It must be on some all-day hike. I tried to rationalize it, but something about the old, weathered tapestry hung in a sloppy triangle shape made me uneasy. I was being ridiculous. I knew. It was probably just a leftover from being bitter about having a neighbor in the first place. It made me think about back when I got ripped from my position in the middle school, since they had fired a high school English teacher. In a day, my workload and class size doubled. It was the same feeling of something familiar being changed suddenly. I chuckled at myself for being so emotionally brittle. I need to relax and stop overthinking everything. I turned my thoughts to the rest of my week's plans as I slipped into my sleeping bag, letting the gentle breeze lull me asleep. The moon was shining coldly when I woke up with a jolt. I tried to stay still, listening carefully as I heard another twig snap just a yard from my tent. I could make out a dark silhouette, the figure of a man projected on the nylon of my shelter. He seemed to be pacing like he was looking for something he had misplaced in the night. My heart began to pound as he slowly, quietly approached. As stealthy as I could manage with my heart bursting from my chest, I reached towards my pack, scared to death but still planning for the worst. Inside, I knew my Colt 1911 sat fully loaded, just in case. Call me paranoid, but with the amount of mountain lions out here in the basin, I always came prepared. "Hello?" The voice came from the figure which now stood in arm's reach of my tent flap. It sounded tentative, stuttering, almost nervous, like a child going to wake his mother when he had a stomachache. I held my breath, my trembling hand gripping the cold metal of my firearm. "Are you okay?" The voice came again, definitely masculine, but it sounded more confident now, paternal in the way it expressed almost genuine concern. I don't know what possessed me to respond. I think it was reflexive, some innate Midwestern politeness. "I'm fine, just leave me alone," I croaked, a hoarse reply barely quieter than a shout. We sat there in silence for a few more seconds, then the figure slowly walked away. He stalked off in an almost dejected manner, his head downcast. I shuddered, the interaction surreal and terrifying, but as much as I would have loved to write it off as a dream, I knew I was awake, feeling the indent left on my palm from the vice grip on my pistol. When the sun rose a few hours later, I felt no relief. I knew deep down in my gut the mysterious visitor was from the tent nearby. I resolved then and there to go and introduce myself. I was still trying to rationalize what had happened as perfectly normal. Maybe he was just socially awkward. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Either way, I felt dread tie a knot in my stomach even tighter with each step as I approached. The campsite was even more dilapidated than I initially thought. The tent was torn, with ragged holes in the side, and a small, black backpack lay haphazardly by the fire. Looking at the state of the charcoal, I'd estimate no one had used the fire for at least a few months. I hesitated, a few feet from the lean-to. I could see a lumpy human shape in the sleeping bag inside through the torn patches on the side. "Hey, hello?" I called out, my voice quaking with fear. I sat in silence. Nothing budged, and it felt like even the birdsong of the waking world faded away. It was just me, and the sleeping form in front of me. His breathing seemed slow, the relaxed inhaling and exhaling rhythmic. With sudden concern for the well-being of my fellow camper, I resolved to try once more. "Hey, are you okay?" The moment the words left my lips, the figure sat up straight. His eyes stared forward, dark hair falling loosely in front of them. He was shirtless, his frame skeletal and pale. He smiled a vacant smile and began to nod slowly. I suddenly felt the way a mouse must feel right before the trap sprung and snapped its neck. I backed away slowly, then turned and walked back to my tent briskly. I had made up my mind. I was moving camp, packing everything up, and heading another half-day south. It wasn't just fear. I also knew I wouldn't be able to relax and enjoy my vacation if I was watching over my shoulder the whole time. But things would need to be significantly worse than a slightly strange, emaciated night owl for me to give up the hard-earned trip. I didn't even bother looking back at the stranger's camp as I made my way down towards Stellar Lake. I wanted to take a break and get a quick swim in the ice-cold, snow-fed water. I was stiff after spending the whole night crouched, fondling my 1911. I made it to the lake by noon, dropped my pack on the rocky shore, and set my clothes inside it. I brought swim trunks for this exact reason, and I gasped as I settled into the gently lapping frosty waves. I saw a party of hikers on the opposite shore and gave a friendly wave. It made me feel safer, knowing that it wasn't just me and the freak I'd seen earlier. I swam a few laps until I began to shiver uncontrollably. I waded back to the shore where I had left my belongings. I grabbed the towel I set out and dried off. It was just after 1 p.m, so if I left now, I could make it to Spring Creek, where I planned to stay the rest of the trip. I opened my backpack and immediately noticed the absence of the clothes I had just put in. I dug through the pack frantically, laying every article out in a line on the ground. Everything else was exactly as it should be. I was especially relieved to find my gun, but my dirty laundry was gone. In the few minutes I spent in the lake, someone grabbed my shirt, pants, and underwear and ran off into the forest without me noticing. And I bet I know exactly who did it. The stranger from earlier must have followed me. Whatever fucked up reason he came to my tent, stole my clothes, I didn't want to know. At this point, I changed my plans completely. I'd work my way back towards the trailhead I had parked at. I'd cut around the base of Buck Mountain through the woods. There was a community trail there, not on any maps but well worn. I knew that it meant spending one more night in the park since it was a steep hike, but it was the most direct route back. I threw on my extra change of clothes and started a double-time pace up the gentle rocky slope into the forest. The whole time I was frantically looking at all sides of the trail. Every rustle in a bush, the chirp of a bird, or the knock of a falling acorn made me nearly break my neck as I whipped around. The sun set once again as I was deep in the trees along the side of the mountain. The evening sun no longer seemed beautiful, the pink and orange light casting long, twisting shadows that made me even more jumpy. I made camp hastily. I'd take a quick nap and get moving at first light. It may seem strange considering the situation, but trying to navigate at night in the forest is a death sentence, and I didn't want to get lost, especially if he was following me. I sat, quivering on my bedroll, waiting for the sound of footsteps to throw me into a full-on panic. Eventually, despite my anxiety, I drifted into an uneasy slumber. As the sun rose and dappled light fell on my face, I slowly felt my consciousness return before I staggered upright. The tent, swaying gently against the wind, was in tatters. Hundreds of small, jagged holes covered the blue synthetic surface, and one, a much larger one, was torn away right at the foot of my makeshift bed. That had been where I left my pack and my boots. Both of these items were gone now without a trace. As I looked closer, I gasped as I saw that each of the holes perfectly matched the shape of a set of human teeth. I let out a choked, desperate cry as I abandoned my shelter and ran into the woods towards the trail. My feet were torn into by small rocks, thorns, and roots with each step. I barely noticed the pain as I sprinted, flight response taking over entirely. The park ranger I ran into must have thought I'd lost it, the way he looked at me with pitying eyes. I hopped his truck, and he was kind enough to take me back to where I'd parked. I told him everything that had happened, words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. As I got out, he called me back for a second. Based on everything that happened, can you give me your contact info, so we can follow up if you want to press any charges? The ranger said, his eyes friendly. I agreed, but somehow I doubted he would follow up on the mad ravings of a shoeless hiker. I drove back to the town outside of the park in a daze. My wallet, fortunately, had been in my pocket the whole trip, and the bread and breakfast had some vacancy. I fell back on the bed in my new room and sobbed. It wasn't just the fear of being hunted, nor the disappointment of a ruined vacation, but a sense of relief that overwhelmed me. I spent the rest of the day sightseeing in White Pine County. It's a cute area with some historic buildings and rustic casinos. By the time I came back to my motel room, I almost forgotten about my horrifying experience. I went to sleep, but not before triple checking that the door was locked and deadbolted. I tried to get comfortable on the stiff mattress, but the same feeling of being watched kept me awake. I rolled onto my side and tried to screw my eyes shut and force myself to rest. Suddenly, after about 10 minutes in this position, something happened that made my heart stop. The bed depressed slightly as someone sat down on it, and I could hear something sliding across the sheets. A moist, clammy hand started to stroke my hair gently, the same way you'd gently pet a kitten. I could hear him breathing, a harsh, ragged sound. I bit my tongue and tried to play possum, as the thin, bony fingers began to pluck hairs one by one from my scalp. Tears streamed down my face, from the pain as he began pulling at clumps of it, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. I almost wrenched my arm away when I felt his other hand reaching down and grabbing my own. The hand held mine gently. It seemed almost loving. Without warning, the calloused, rough fingers grabbed my thumb and swiftly yanked off the nail. I screamed involuntarily and fell of the bed in a heap. I could hear the sickening sound of teeth crunching and a soft, childlike giggle coming from my bed. I ran out the door and jumped in my car parked outside. I drove all that night, and most of the next day until I made it home. I still imagined that hideous, emaciated man following me. The fear kept me awake all the way home. After I parked in my driveway, I was briefly terrified by the sudden buzz of my phone. I answered it, hearing the voice of the ranger on the other end. "Hey, we went down to the ridge where you camped. Found 2 tents down there, but nobody around," he said, his voice making it clear he was holding something back. 2 tents? I asked, voice trembling. Yeah, one blue and one green, both torn to ribbons. I felt dizzy with fear, knowing that the other tent must be mine. He must have taken it, set it all up again, but why? "We found your pack," the ranger continued quietly. "We can arrange to have it sent to you." I thanked him profusely for his help and hung up. It's been 3 months since this terrible nightmare, and I still haven't gotten a good night's sleep. Worst of all, I still find that sporadically I'll lose random belongings. A sock here and there, a pencil I set down a few minutes earlier, and it's driving me mad. I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe being alone again, but I know for sure I'm not going camping ever again. I work the night shift at a data center from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. My job is network monitoring. Basically, I stare at a computer screen all night watching for alarms. Once per shift, I walk back to the server racks and make sure all the cooling systems are functional, assuming nothing is wrong, which is almost always the case. I am free to browse the internet until morning. Last week seemed to be no different. After receiving the turnover from the evening shift, I settled in for another boring night. I read through the day's emails, opened my monitoring software and camera feed, and started looking for the night's entertainment. My typical activity is to freak myself out by watching scary stories on YouTube. The environment is perfect, lights dimmed, all alone in an empty building for hours. I pulled up a compilation of terrifying, true, scary stories and let my imagination run wild. I was absorbed into the tense story of a hiker pursued by an unknown entity in the woods. My vision narrowed in on the screen and senses on alert. When I thought I noticed movement on one of the cameras monitoring the server racks, I felt a pang of anxiety and my heart jumped. But this was not my first time intentionally frightening myself, and paranoia is inevitable in this situation. I put the camera feed into full screen. The lights were all off in the data hall as they should be. They only turn on when there's movement. Just my imagination. Still, I kept the panel opened in full screen while I went back to my video, glancing back occasionally. Not 5 minutes later, I saw a shadow again out of the corner of my eye. Looking at the camera feed, I still couldn't see anything, and the lights were still off, but I knew I saw something move. I got up from my desk and walked out into the hallway, then through an access door into the data hall. The rows of fluorescent lighting all clicked on at once, flooding the room in light. I paused to let my eyes adjust and tried to slow my breathing. I strained to hear any signs of movement somewhere in the racks, but the drone of the servers covered up any noise. With mounting dread, I began checking between the rows. With each corner I rounded, I felt my panic grow. My heart pounded louder than the scream of the servers. As I approached the last row, I knew that whatever I saw would be so unthinkably horrible, my body would not be able to bear it. I could barely breathe. My hands and face were dripping cold sweat, and I felt the urge to vomit. I willed myself forward and, in a moment that felt like an eternity, rounded the corner and saw nothing. I was alone, of course. I let myself get freaked out again from those stupid videos. Relieved, I went back to my desk. I switched over to a documentary on fighter jets, and the rest of the night passed uneventfully. At last, morning came. The morning shift came in with his usual hangover, and we discussed the non-events of the night. After exchanging a few pleasantries, I packed up to head home. On my way to my car, I noticed something under my windshield wiper. Drawing closer, I saw that it was a Polaroid picture. With trembling hands, I picked it up from under the blade and held it up to my face. Rows of server racks in a brightly lit room. I stood facing away from the camera, preparing to look around a corner. In the middle of the frame, reaching out from behind the camera, a man's hand clutched a knife. Simon was easy prey. Limping, stuttering, always avoiding eye contact like he was afraid of his own shadow. We hated him for how pitiful he was. Hated him even more because he dared to exist in our world. It was a joke at first, something to pass the time after one too many drinks. Just scare him a little, make him run, watch him trip over his own feet. But it spiraled, like things do when you've got cruelty running through your veins. He begged us to stop. I remember his voice, trembling as he stumbled through the trees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. We didn't stop, not until he fell hard. That sound, the crunch of bone hitting rock, the way his body just crumpled, limp and broken. I swear for a moment, everything was silent. except for the crackle of leaves underfoot. We just stood there, staring down at him, frozen in horror. His eyes, they were still open, still wide, but he wasn't seeing us anymore. We ran. We swore we'd never talk about it again, and we didn't. We let the silence swallow the memory. We moved on, or at least tried to, but Simon didn't. It started with Brianna. She drowned in her own pool, which was strange enough, but the scratches on her neck told a different story. It was like someone had held her under, someone who wasn't there. At her funeral, we didn't even have to say it. We knew. Then came Lila. She fell down the stairs, except her parents said they heard her laughing before she screamed. Laughing. The kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl, like something inside her snapped. They found her at the bottom, her neck twisted, her eyes wide and glassy, just like Simon's. Jess didn't last much longer. She drove off a cliff late one night. Witnesses said they saw a man standing by the edge, limping, just watching as her car went over. No one believed it, but we did. We knew. One by one he came for them, and I watched helpless, knowing my turn was next. I tried to run, to change, to hide. I dyed my hair, cut it short, dressed differently, even lost weight. I became a stranger to myself, thinking I could escape him. But there was one thing I couldn't change. The birthmark. A small, crescent-shaped scar just under my collarbone. Ugly. Stupid. I'd always hated it. But now it's the thing that will doom me, because I know Simon remembers. Emma was the last to go before me. She started seeing him everywhere, in the corners of mirrors, in the shadows of empty rooms. She called me, frantic, saying he was inside her house. The next day, her parents found her, twisted in her sheets, eyes bulging, her face frozen in a mask of terror. And now it's just me. I feel him, you know, in the walls, in the whispers that creep through my empty apartment at night. He's always there, just out of sight, just close enough to remind me that I can't escape. I try to stay awake, try to keep the lights on, but it doesn't matter. Every time I close my eyes, I feel his breath on the back of my neck. I hear that dragging limp, the sound of his twisted legs scraping across the floor. Last night I woke up to laughter, not my own, his. He was standing at the foot of my bed, his face a pale, bloated echo of the boy we left behind. His eyes, empty, like they'd never seen light. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just looked at me, his gaze sliding down to the birthmark on my chest, that cursed crescent shape that gives me away. And then he smiled. He's not here to kill me quickly like the others. No, that would be too easy. He wants me to suffer, to feel the weight of what we did pressing down on my chest, suffocating me day by day. He's going to torment me, just like we tormented him, until there's nothing left but the sound of my own screams. I can't run, I can't hide. He's always watching, always waiting. I know he'll never leave me. Not until I've paid for what we did, piece by piece. Every breath I take, every flicker of light in the corner of my eye. He's there, reminding me that it's not over. It will never be over. I can't escape. He's coming for me, just like he came for the others. And when he does, I'll hear that limp dragging across the floor. I'll hear his voice whispering my name, and I'll know that this time there's nowhere left to run. Because Simon always gets the last laugh. We were untouchable back then. Emma, Lila, Jess, Brianna, and me, Clara. 5 girls who ruled our little town, perfect on the outside but rotten beneath the surface. We took what we wanted, did what we wanted, without a second thought. And then there was him, Simon. I keep waking up in the middle of the night. In fact, it's about 3 a.m. right now as I type this on my phone. It's been like this for almost 2 weeks. I wasn't sure why in the beginning, but now I wish I didn't know. My first clue was a few nights ago, when I could have sworn I was awoken by a sound, a resounding thud that had pulled me from slumber. I wasn't sure, but I sat up and looked around to see if something was amiss. The door to my wife and I's bedroom was slightly ajar, and though it was completely dark, something drew my attention to the void that lay beyond the cracked door. My eyes took a moment to adjust, but I began to make out a shape silhouetted in the pitch darkness. Its body was rather formless, but it seemed to stand on 3 long, impossibly thin legs. I sat motionless for a time, not sure what I was looking at, but a sense of dread grew within me. Then it moved. It was something between a lurch and a skitter, an unnatural thing that I cannot get out of my mind. I wanted to hide beneath my covers like a child, but I have children of my own who were sleeping in their rooms. Getting out of bed that night to investigate, it was just about the most frightening thing I've ever done. The light of my flashlight trembled as I crept through the house, but the house was empty. My kids slept quietly in their beds, and the all was silent for the rest of the night. Last night I awoke again. I don't think it was a sound that did it, but a feeling. I immediately turned on my phone's flashlight to point at the open bedroom door, but there was nothing. Except, I did hear something, not a muted thud as before, but a low, faint chanting. I took a deep breath and got out of bed. When I stepped into the living room of our 1-story house, I strained my ears for the source of the noise. It sounded like it was coming from my 1-year-old son's room. I rushed over and saw it there, hunched over my son's crib. Atop 3 spindly legs sat an amalgamation of faces, horribly twisted and unnaturally fused with one another. It created a distended shape that was lopsided and grotesque. The faces did not have eyes, merely gaping black holes, but I knew it saw me all the same. The chanting that had emanated from the many mouths of the foul being turned into a disharmonic chorus of screeches. It raised one of its long appendages, and the door between us slammed shut. I raced over as my son began to cry, a sound that mingled with the continued discordant wailing of the monster in the night. The doorknob rattled as I struggled to enter my son's bedroom. I called out to him, to find my voice hoarse and shaky. Then, the house fell silent. I was able to open the door, and there was my son, standing in his crib, staring at me. It was such a strange look. Blank, but still somehow full of something. Malice? I cannot say. My wife rushed over, awoken by the commotion. She was frantic, saying she had heard my shout and some other strange noises. I had not told her about what I had seen a few nights before. I was not sure I had truly seen it myself, but now I told her. I told her that something had been in our son's room, bearing over him. We searched his room, and then the house. Our 3-year-old daughter slept soundly. She is a heavy sleeper. The house was once again empty, but nonetheless we gathered the kids and brought them to our bed. My wife looked at me dubiously that night. She asked what I saw, if there was an intruder. I did not know what to say. The small window in my son's room was locked from the inside. We had made a point to check. I told her that I had seen something inhuman, that it closed and locked the door without touching it, that it had the form of a monster. Her dubious look turned to a worried one. Not the frightened look of someone who feared a lurker in the darkness, but the worried look of one who was concerned for the mental well-being of a loved one. I told her perhaps it was a bad dream, and that I had been sleepwalking. And perhaps it was. But for the rest of the night, my son just stared quietly, mostly at nothing, but sometimes at me. I pointed out the odd behavior, but my wife said that it was likely just a product of my odd behavior, that I had woken him up, and he was simply tired. I did not want to make myself seem any crazier than I already sounded, so I said she was right, and told her to get back to sleep. I told her that I had had a nightmare, and I apologized for disturbing her. I did not sleep that night. Neither did my son. Today was strange. I went to work as normal, but my mind could not leave what had happened last night. How could I think of anything else? I wanted so badly to come up with any excuse to spend the night in a hotel, but I knew my wife wouldn't buy it. We're a little strapped for cash, and even if we did get one, what would one night do? So I lay awake tonight. I'm exhausted, but I can't sleep. Apparently my son was unusually quiet today. I think it unnerved my wife. She wanted to take him into a doctor, but he shows no signs of sickness. He's just quiet. But his expression, it has changed. The hollow look of last night has turned to one of malicious joy. Not when my wife looks at him, but I see it. He stares at me with a look that I have never seen on a baby's face before. He feigned sleep at bedtime. My wife put him down, and he kept his eyes closed and his breathing steady. But when I went to his room after my wife had drifted off, he was sitting up in his crib, as if waiting for something. I tried to pick him up, but he growled at me. When I persisted, he let out such an unnatural shriek. Not a cry, but a scream of anger and hatred. My wife came running. She glared at me and demanded to know what I had done. I told her that I just wanted to spend the night with him and our daughter. I told her that I feared something was wrong with our son, that I wanted the family together. My wife, she doesn't scare easily. She is a rational and logical woman. She could see that I was worried, and that worried her. I don't think it was the same worry I felt. I worried for our safety. She worried for me. I could see it. Her voice was gentle when she told me that everything was okay, that I needed to sleep. My son had fallen asleep not long after my wife rushed over. I knew it was a ruse. I don't know how or why a 1-year-old would pretend to sleep, but I knew he was. What could I do? Insist? Incur the wrath of my wife, my son, or whatever it was that I knew would come again tonight? I asked her one last time, begged to let the kids sleep with us. She sighed and relented. My son opened his eyes when his mother picked him up. He gave me the most wrathful glare I have seen on any human face. It looked so very wrong on his. So now I lay awake, with my son awake next to me. We are both waiting for it. My wife and daughter are uncomfortably smushed up in bed as well, asleep, but tenuously. 4 to a king bed is not ideal, but I could not bear to have them away from me. And now there is a ringing in my ear. My son grows agitated. I know it's coming. I don't know what to do. Please, what do I do? October 13th, 2008. It was a very dark, rainy night. I remember that night very clearly. I remember it raining heavily as I sat at the bus stop waiting for the rain to clear out. I remember checking my wristwatch and seeing it was 10:47 p.m. on October near Halloween. And of course it creeps me out and spooks me out. Halloween was never my thing. I felt a numbing feeling behind me but brushed it off. The last bus of the night stopped in front of me. It was those regular yellow buses with huge windows where you could see the raindrops sliding down the glass panels. I thought twice and boarded the bus. I paid for my ride, hoping I could save it, though it would take hours for me to go home because of the heavy rain. I boarded the bus and walked down the aisle. I could still remember the blank faces of each possible passenger I could fathom, especially the driver. His eyes, he was staring at me intently. I think it was about to pop out. Each time I took a step further towards a seat, the people's staring gave me continuous goosebumps that I could still feel to this day. Finally, I sat next to an old man, very tall. I could assume he could reach my cabinet's top shelf and place my favorite toy there when I was little. I think he was around 6 feet. I wasn't able to get a glimpse of his face because of his ancient top hat dangling above his noticeable bald head. Yet, when I sat next to him, I vividly remember a stench looming towards me. It's like the stench I smelled when I went hiking and found a dead deer's body lying around the corners. Dead. Retching animal corpses, decaying skin being eaten by crows. Probably kind of smell. I tried to cover my nose, but it didn't do any help. And so I tried to get off the seat and find another. But those eyes, they were all staring at me. Their seemingly astonished eyes crept up around my neck, circling to my nape and going down my spine. A shiver I felt. Haunting it felt. I finally got away from that god-awful smell that old man was reeking of and got into a cozy little seat on the right side of the bus. I guess sitting beside an old man at the very back was a bad idea. Curses. Why did it have to rain in a Saturday evening? The creepy staring, the disgusting smell, now this fogged-up window. My night couldn't be all better, though I felt a little weird the first time I put my foot down on this bus. All I could feel was the continuous goosebumps starting to creep all around my back, and I felt very itchy. Wait, that temperature. I could hear someone breathing behind me. I could feel their breath. I could smell their stench. Must it be the old man from earlier? What the hell is he doing smelling me like I'm some prey? I couldn't just let him do this to me, but this might cause me a commotion and get kicked out of this bus. so I brushed it off and looked out the window. Minutes had passed by and I heard some clicking in my left ear. I wanted to turn around so bad, but something's telling me no. And a while later I heard more clicking. I feel like it's just the old man clicking his tongue to pass the time, so I tried to sleep. It felt like minutes had turned to hours, and seconds had turned to years. I wasn't able to fully delve into a deeper sleep, woken up from an ambulance siren. Annoyed and bewildered, I checked my watch, and what I saw confused me, really confused me. The watch still says 10:47, as if time has stopped. It can't be broken. I mean, it's working perfectly earlier, and it's still working now. I tried to sleep it away, but I just couldn't. How could I not? No, it's not because I can't sleep, it's because I cannot sleep. I remember that old man. I can still feel the hot breath hitting my neck. I remember its hot, rotting breath. I remember it creeping behind me. I was scared. I was scared, and no one was helping. I was scared of what he might do to me. I was scared to open my eyes. I was scared. I am scared. To this day, I am still traumatized. I felt the need to stop it, so I opened my eyes. I opened it and I saw everything. Those eyes. My God, those eyes. I felt the bus stop. I felt their stares pierce me like the stake that pierced Jesus. Their faces were blank. No, 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 no. I turned my gaze towards the outside world, towards the window, and saw red. The rain turned red. I jumped out of my seat and looked around, seeing everyone but him. The old man was gone. How? Why only him? What about the others? The darkness crept around me. I felt it engulfing me, swallowing me, eating me alive. The bus's rooftop flew into pieces and rain started to fill up my pants with yellow and I opened my eyes. I saw it. The tall, lanky man. Its ruined top hat, sharp claws, freshly ironed business suit. I could hear his footsteps ringing in my ear. His face. I couldn't see it. But all I heard was the clicking. The next thing I knew, the people sitting weren't there. It was just me and it. It stopped. It chuckled. And there it was. It revealed to me his face. It was smiling. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.